to wear your earphones. Make sure the thing's turned on.
I just turned it on.
Okay.
Can you hear? Okay.
Okay, well, this is Dave Gaddis, and today we're interviewing Dr. Barbara Becker, who's the Dean of the School of Urban and Public Affairs at UT Arlington on October 7th, 2014. Why don't we start at the very beginning? Why don't you tell me when and where you were born?
I don't have to give the date now. Okay.
Approximately.
I was born in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
So I'm a native. And in fact, my father's family were among the original people that came with Stephen F. Austin. So,
Okay. You want to tell a little bit about your father, what he did?
well, he's not the point of this story, is he?
No, but just it's part of
Well,
your
he was
background.
politics, and
Okay.
you know, he had, and my great aunt is the most interesting because she was one of the first women to run for public office. She held it for 52 years. She was Travis County clerk for 52 years, and if you read about LBJ, you'll read about Emily Lindbergh,
Okay.
who was quite a myth and quite an interesting woman. So I came from a family where my father said to his two daughters, you better be prepared for whatever life hands you. Be as educated as you can get and go out and think of yourself as independent. So,
So you lived in Austin throughout your childhood? You went to high
yes.
school there?
Oh, yeah, Stephen F. Austin High School.
Okay. And then did you go straight into college, or did you?
Yes, I went straight into college, but I went off to school. My father said, you need to go away to college. And in those days, I don't know if they do it anymore, but you could take college board exams, and if you scored certain things. So I went off to, you got out of that course. So I actually went off to college as a sophomore because I had tested out of all the English and math and everything that you had to have. So
So did you go to UT, or did you go
no,
somewhere
I
else
went to
first?
the University of Washington in
Oh.
Seattle.
So you really went
So-
away for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I said, what's for this place away? And I asked for Hawaii and Alaska, and my parents said no. So we settled on Washington.
Okay. And what were you studying at?
I actually went up to do pre-med.
Okay.
And after a year of all these sciences, I said, I can't stand this. I'll never forget a lab exam in biology. And if you were not one of the first 2 or 3 people through the exam, then you would get to the microscope and it would just be garbage because people had spit on it, put hairs in it, you know, moved it, done all kinds of things because it was very competitive to get into med school. So I said, this isn't all that interesting to me. I'm not going to go there. So went to geology.
Okay.
And because I had all this science, I had to do something in the sciences. And I finished up in 3 years, and Vietnam was starting up very big. So I got married
Okay.
because he was going off to war and may never return. He went off to war 4 times and returned every time. A little worse for wear.
Okay.
And so in 1974, I had my son. And at that point in time, my husband was the one of the Air Force One pilots. And the day that I had my son, my husband was flying Nixon out to San Clemente for the last time.
Oh, okay.
So it was an interesting headline for my son's baby book.
Now, you said you went to the University of Washington, but you got your degree at UT Austin?
Yes. What happened was I would come back in the summer and take classes because my father wouldn't let me work. And so by accident, I thought I had another year at college, but by accident, I would have to transfer back and forth. So in those days, I don't know what they would do nowadays. So by accident, I get a telephone call, and I've graduated from the University of Texas in the summer taking these courses. So
Okay.
said fine. So
And every once in a while I run across a little tidbit. And
I know you have to follow up on
I'm
it.
going to have to ask about your fashion career.
Well, I started modeling in Austin when I was in high school, and I modeled some for Neiman Marcus. And then when I went off to school, I modeled for a company known, I was the, I don't know what you would call it, sort of the symbol of that, particularly sportscaster for that company, and I did some for Montgomery Ward.
Okay.
And then I got married, at the end of all that, got married and was living in Florida when Barden's contacted me and asked me to replace Elsie the cow. So and I was married to a man who, in those days, we were kind of, well, I'm at the edge of the baby boomers, so society was changing dramatically, and he said, oh, no wife of mine should work, blah, blah, blah. So I said I would do that. I would open grocery stores and stuff and pose for their pictures. If I could be home by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I would be there in plenty of time for him to come home.
Okay.
So that went on for a year and a half until the day he drove up to the airfield in Pensacola, and I was on a big billboard in a French maid's costume handing a bowl of ice cream out on the billboard. And he was a little upset about that.
Okay.
So he comes storming home. But when I showed him the savings account that I had been squirreling away, he was real happy. We bought a Jaguar SK with it, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, so then one day Barden's comes to me and says, the company guy, and said, well, we have some news for you. We're replacing you with Elsie the cow. People really identify with Elsie and not with you, lady. So that's my claim to fame as a professional model. I'm the only one ever replaced by a cow.
Okay. And so after you got your bachelor's degree, you did some social work and you taught a little?
Yes, I did. I actually, I've had, what's the saying in life, you can be so very smart or so very lucky? Well, I was very lucky because I sort of have been at the right place at the right time often. My husband was with a squadron out in California, and Vietnam was ramping up. And they asked me to teach for this company that was trying to get the guys through high school. And the Marine Corps was very concerned about that because they, in their whole history, had never accepted individuals that had not finished high school. But because of the high attrition rate in Vietnam, they were having to do that. So it was very important to them that these young men get their high school diplomas. So I started teaching these classes, and for someone who had led a very sheltered life, it was a very interesting and very meaningful experience for me. And sadly, often I would they would go overseas before the diplomas came, and I would write the families and send them the diplomas. And often they would write back and say, Johnny was killed, but thank you so much for this diploma. So it was an interesting job on a lot of levels. And then they said, well, we're not getting enough through because it was, one class at a time. So they got a few of us together and we wrote what became the GED. It was exam to get people their diploma.
Okay.
So we wrote the first one. I mean, it's been improved on many, many times over since then.
Okay. And at some point in time, you had your own interior design firm?
Oh, yeah, that was bored, Friend and I went out, and God help those people. I hope they liked what we did.
Okay. Well, and at some point in time, you decided you want to go back to school. And
Yes, I found myself divorced with an 18-month-old, and what should I do? And I had gotten a job with a state school in California teaching, and they had just passed Proposition 13, and they said last in, first out the door, so goodbye. So I said, oh, well, this isn't going to work. I think I will go back. And I actually started out to get a PhD in small college administration, believe it or not. And about the third semester, I took an education course, and about third semester in, they said, you have to take another education course, because I had avoided them after that first one. And I said, well, really don't want to. So
how did you get into planning?
I went, this is news for everyone, I went to one of those career counseling places and looked through the big books and said, oh, this sounds interesting, because you can be sort of jack of all trades and master of none. You can do all these different things. And so to me that really sounded fascinating, that I would not be stuck doing the same thing. You can obviously see by my life I wasn't into that. So I signed up and took a course, and the first course I took, I said, oh, this is great, and applied to the program and got in. And about 3/4 of the way through the program, I was approached by the then department chair, and he had a heart.
Do you remember who that was?
I was trying to think of his name, which is terrible. He died of a heart attack. Really a wonderful man. Isn't that horrible? His name. You get old, you forget. But anyway, he said, have you thought about going for your PhD? I said yes. And he said, I'd like for you to go to Harvard. So he started working with me, and we got all the funding for Harvard to go to Harvard itself, not to live in Boston. And I was a single parent. And in the midst of all that, he died of a heart attack. And I said, this isn't really going to work for me, because I have to take care of my child. And at that point, I was holding down a couple of jobs on campus and stuff to make it happen. So I started talking to, he just died. Stepped off the mountain in California.
Kent Butler.
Kent Butler. Thank you. Let's see. Get on. Kent Butler said to me, we're really working on getting a PhD started. Are you willing to be the first one in? And I said, great. I would love that. I think that would be great. And I had to do it through geography. I had to start out through geography department. And in a way that saved me, because I didn't know a whole lot of geography. And there were 35 of us that started out in it. And every week we had to write 3-4 critiques of articles in a book. And that was before the computer. So I had to read everything in the first day and a half, so that I had time to type multiple times to get it correct enough to pass. Because they wouldn't have 3 typos, and they gave the paper an F. So the typing had to be really good. But what really saved me was I didn't know enough to know that some of these theories were bunk. And so I would just blithely write rejection of these theories in these articles and all, and somehow that really impressed them. So from that point on, I got full funding through the program. It was an interesting journey, because I'll never forget my defense for my dissertation. Well, not the defense of the dissertation itself, but my comps up to it. Went on for a week and a half, because everybody was trying to one-up the other side. So it was half planning, half geography, and it was a never-ending process. But finally we made it through all that, and started writing the dissertation.
And what was the dissertation topic?
Well, that's interesting that you should ask, because I was very lucky. I got it funded by the Texas State Department of Agriculture, which in those days was very powerful. And I surveyed all the businesses in 101 counties in Texas, those that were non-contiguous to urban areas. And I disproved the growth pole theory, which is basically if you build it, they will come. And I showed how all these businesses were out there in these very rural counties, that they were not dependent on the major cities to survive. So having done that, and it was at the time that Brasilia was very big and people were talking about that a lot, and it was a disaster. So, you know, it sort of fit in with the times. What was nice was that I got so much data because a letter from the ag department went out on every survey. So I had 87% response rate. Incredible, right?
Yeah.
And so volumes of data that had to be done. And that was the days of the cards, you know, where it's pretty hairy getting all that done, all that. But it was data that other people have been able to use as well. So that was good.
Okay, and you finished your PhD in
Finished my PhD.
89 or so?
Yep.
And so, looking back on your education, were there any particular mentors? You mentioned Kent. Was there any other people?
Well, Kent was a
important to you?
mentor. Oh, see, you're asking for names, and I hadn't even thought about these people for so long. But yeah, I had a few along the way, and I got to go and teach at Oxford, and that was really nice. And then I came back and went to what was then Southwest Missouri State University, but is now Missouri State. And I did that. I mean, I think y'all will find this interesting. I did that. I didn't go for the PhD to be a professor. I went to be a consultant. I thought that I would have a really good business because doctor would have such authority, right? So, but my chair of my committee believed in a strange way of provoking his students to greatness. And he came to me one day and he said, "You're too old, you're a woman, you will never get an academic job." And I thought, I'll show you. And so I got all these job offers. And I'll never forget, UCLA offered me a job, but they were only going to pay me $27,000. And I said, I have a small child. I have to live and have to live fairly close to wherever he's in school and stuff because I have to get to him. And they said, this is UCLA. Why would you need more? So that's how I ended up. I went to the school that paid me the most money. So that's how I ended up where I ended up. But
Okay.
it was an interesting process.
And you were there for what, 8 years or so?
Was it that long? It didn't seem that long. But anyway, I was there long enough to get tenure.
Okay.
And I was the only woman in a department of 27 men. So that was an interesting experience. I came in school started in September, came in time to start school, and in November, they came to me and they said, we're going to make you a department director, a program director, and you're going to create the undergraduate planning program and get the graduate planning program up to accreditation level. And I was 2.5 months on the job as a brand new assistant professor when I took over that task. And it was an interesting journey. I hired people, some of which stayed there, others moved on. I did get tenure and promotion. That was nice. The program, the undergraduate program, is accredited, so we can be very proud of that. We never could get the geology department and all to not teach and to let us have our own program as a master's, so it never really got to the level of being accredited. But we had total control over the undergraduate, and that's how we could get it accredited.
Okay. And at some point in time, you got involved in APA. Do you remember?
Oh, that was there.
Okay.
Yes, at the very get-go. It was interesting. The Milt, can't remember Milt's last name, who was the head of this department of Mishmash, said to me, okay, in my first year, you must take the AICP exam and be active in APA. Well, I had been active as a student, so that was fine with me. I needed to be active to really get advice on things. So I became very active in the Missouri chapter, which is small enough that you really get to know everybody pretty quickly. We were probably one of the furthest south parts of the chapter, but that was really nice. And then one stormy day, I drove 100 miles to where I could take the AICP exam and sat for that and was positive that I had flunked it. So it was great relief when I had passed it. But I'll never forget the drive there. It seemed to go on forever. But I became active enough, and then they elected me, believe it or not, president of the chapter. And that was a great experience because I met and made friends with a lot of people at the national level as chapter president, and many that have remained friends over a very long time.
Okay.
So that's been very nice.
Okay. There's this parallel organization called ACSP. And,
Yes.
when did you get involved with that?
I'll never forget the first meeting after I became a professor was actually held in Austin, Texas. So I said, oh, I'll go back and get to see everybody I know and all. And I went back and I gave a paper about trying to make my program a very hands-on program for my students. And I will say that at the time that I went through the University of Texas at Austin program, it was very theoretical. We never did a project. I never did a project. So I've always said I went on for the PhD because I didn't know what a planner did still. I was afraid to go out in the profession. So I swore when they said you will create this program that I would make it very applied so that all the students would really feel very comfortable stepping out into the profession. So my talk, which I had spent most of my time in the bathroom avoiding the fact I didn't know anyone but two people. And then all of a sudden, all these people started really talking to me. And also, in my first meeting, I actually, by fluke, got very involved with a certain task force and all on the ACSP. And so became very active in it at the same time. And I was very lucky because they gave me a bunch of ideas. So I went back to school and I thought, here I am in Missouri, in the southern part of Missouri. There are actually state laws in Missouri, or there were at that time, laws that said you can't have zoning in a rural county. You can't, do a whole lot of things in a rural county. So I said, how am I going to get all these rural counties around here to want planning? Because you couldn't do a whole lot of things. And then it struck me. And so we created the first Council of Governments headed by a university in the United States. It's still going strong. The university still heads it. And it was all to get business for the students. And it really worked. We did projects all over the state. We did a large number in Branson, Missouri. And a lot of my research was written on experiences there because I'll never forget Bobby Vinton's Blue Velvet Theater blew down 3 times and there was never a strong wind. We finally got fire nozzles and stuff in the theaters and all by going through OSHA. So we could never get the legislature to put in all those building codes and things, but we could get OSHA to come in and make it happen. So.
Well, you kind of alluded to it, but what were some of your research interests? You talked about small
Well,
towns, and you talked
yeah,
about some of the-
economic development
Okay.
was my initial love. But then here I was having to literally teach everything. And I was at a university where we taught 4 classes a semester, plus build this program, plus I had to publish. So I had to use what was happening in my life pretty much to make that happen. So a lot of it became then very applied, kind of how to bring applied research back into the classroom and things like that, and or how to plan where there are no building codes, no zoning. What does that really mean? So I began, and I also felt that where I published was the only way to actually advertise my program to a much broader audience. So that was another rationale to do a lot of the research that I did. It was actually to get Missouri State on the map, and I guess we did. I got me on the map anyway. But because I've always been an administrator, I've never had the luxury of enough time to do the kind of research I thought I was going to do when I started out down this rocky road of the academic life. Because from Missouri State, I was hired by the University of Arizona, half-time in the Drachman Institute and half-time as a faculty member in the re-resurrected planning program. And they wanted me in the program because they wanted me to write their first accreditation document. So at a fairly early stage in my career, I became the great expert on writing accreditation documents. By that point, I was writing my 3rd, 4th, 5th. And the Drachman Institute was sort of a think tank, and I went out and started doing projects around the state of Arizona and became active in the chapter as well, and wonderful folks. And I've always told students the reason I love planning is that it's full of wonderful people, and it's about the only occupation I know where those that are in it welcome the newcomers instead of knifing in the back and trying to keep them out of their job. They're helping the young get started in their careers. So I got that same, when I went there as a professor, I got that same kind of welcome and please become active, and I became the president of the section and sat on the board for a number of years and that sort of thing. So I was pretty active in the Arizona chapter.
So you went to Arizona in '95, and you talked about some of the projects that you worked on. It sounded like you did a lot of contract work while you were out there. Were there any particular projects that you were particularly proud of? Or?
Well, I won a couple of national awards for projects that we did. One of the best, I think, was an economic development project with the Hopi, and they own fairly large chunk of land in Winslow, Arizona, and they came to us on how to use that. And we broke the class up into teams, and they were housing and industry and farming and a whole bunch of things. And we said, what would you do with this land? And then put it all together. And so the Hopi had how it could produce income or help the nation with some of its issues like housing. And then they showed how you could put parts of each together to create a whole different plan. And so it was a very interesting plan. It has been actually used by the Hopi Nation, which is always a plus, right? And I really enjoyed working for a lot of the Native American reservations. So that proved very interesting. And since there are 21 reservations in the state of Arizona, you had a lot to choose from. we got to be all over the state. We also did a number of very interesting projects for the national parks. In fact, we joined with architecture to save the only black officers club in the United States that was built specifically for black officers. And that was at Fort Huachuca, which was also the home of the Buffalo Soldiers.
Mhm.
So that was interesting.
And so in 2008, you made a move back to Texas.
Yes, I got this telephone call and they said, would you consider coming and interviewing for a dean? And I'll be honest with you, I had just fought a 2.5-year battle at the University of Arizona to save the planning program. With 9/11, the state of Arizona literally went bankrupt. There was no money. And so they started cutting the finances of the universities pretty sharply. A third of the budget cuts came out of the University of Arizona for the state. So one day the president and the provost woke up and said, if we eliminate these 17 master's and PhD programs, then we will eliminate so many faculty and we can really put more money into these few programs that we really want, which one was engineering. So what's new in the world? So they made this announcement right when we all came back in January. They were eliminating these programs. And I said, oh, no, you're not. Not eliminating planning. It's too important. And 3 programs were saved. Landscape architecture was saved because the firms that sell irrigation and all that kind of stuff said they would give the university $1.5 million. Library science was saved because a couple said they were leaving a couple of $1 million in their will. And the fact they were 32 and 34 didn't seem to bother anybody, but and we saved the planning program by going to every regents meeting and getting 6 to 8 people to stand up and talk about saving the program. And so I will say this, that all the planners, wherever they graduate from the state of Arizona, were fabulous because pretty much all of them came and talked on our behalf. And we had T-shirts, Save the School of Planning. We really went all out. And I never spoke, and the same person never spoke. And so for 1.5 years, we tormented the Board of Regents. And in fact, Gabriella Gifford got up and spoke on our behalf, and it was wonderful. One of those wonderful moments where she said, I know that you know me as the senator who's in charge of the finance committee, but don't think of me that way. And then she went into her talk. So, they were all, what can we do? So finally, the regents meeting where I knew we had all the votes, they voted to save us. I got up and spoke. So that was exhausting time. It was a real fight. And so I was sort of just sitting there basking in my glory because now everybody on the campus was terrified of me. I'd pulled that coup off when I got the phone call. So when I came to interview, I thought, I don't know. And I came and I got the pages mixed up on my talk. So about 1/3 of the way through the talk, I couldn't even read my talk, so I just had to give it off the cuff, and I was stunned and amazed. The president didn't get to interview me, so they made me come back and simply come. I flew in the morning, talked with the president, and then flew out that afternoon. And time passed, and then one day I got this phone call. I was stunned and amazed.
Okay, so you got to come back to Texas.
Got to come back to Texas. And actually, many years, I won't tell how many, but many years ago, my older sister had married and moved to Fort Worth and has lived here ever since. So for me, it really was, in many ways, a homecoming because I was coming back to my sister.
And I didn't mean to pass it up, but I guess while you were still in Arizona, you got elected to the College of Fellows of AICP.
Yes.
So,
Yes, and while being a fellow is really quite an honor, what made it even more special for me was that I got in the first year the divisions could nominate people, and the Women in Planning division nominated me and put my name forward. So it was a really special moment when I got to be a fellow.
Okay, well, good. I'll pass that on to the divisions.
Oh, please do.
Since
Please
I do
do.
have a connection. Let's talk a little bit about the Planning Accreditation Board, the PAB.
Yes.
How'd you get involved with that?
Well, I didn't confess. The first time we went through accreditation, there were only 2 faculty members. They were really dedicated entirely to planning. So I'll never forget picking up the team at the airport, and Susan and I would be there to greet them and take them to their hotel, and the head of the site visit team came off the airplane and said, "Oh, the whole planning department's here to greet me." So we knew we were pretty sunk on that moment on. So I wrote a second one, and we finally got it accredited. Then I went to Arizona, and Beatrice said, "Oh, when I got that, I had to write that one." And when we got the accreditation, Beatrice asked me to be on the site team.
Okay.
So I got involved with going out on site visits, and the first time I chaired a site visit, Fernando Costa was on the team, which I really lucked out because he was a great help, of course, and became good friends. So that I have always enjoyed going out on the site visits, and for me they're wonderful because you can go to another university and see what they're doing and get some ideas. And I would always bring stuff back and say, "Look, guys, isn't this wonderful?" So I used to use those visits a lot, and went on many of those. And then one day, the president of the ACSP said, "Would you consider sitting on the board?" And I said, "In a heartbeat." So Mike Hibbard was the individual, and so I sat on the board. The first job I had on the board was on the committee to change the standards. And this last year was our first year with the new standards, and there needs to be a little tweaking, but they seem to be working. So I've had 6 years of dedicated to the standards, but we've done a great deal, and
And
I'm very proud of the
You're
time.
not just a member of the board, you're currently chair of the board?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I'm the chair of the board now.
But your term ends the end of the year?
Yes, it ends December 1, but that's because I go off the board. So it all comes to an end.
Okay.
6 years later, they limit your terms to 2 terms,
Okay.
and I guess I could sit out a while and go back on, but it's a lot of work because where a site team reads all of the materials for a school, they go and they spend the 3 very intensive days there, and they really look for everything, and then they write up the report. We review all of those schools' self-studies and the site visit team reports, and so there's a great deal of work just in maintaining the accreditation of different programs. So
Actually, I sat in on your phone call to the board last weekend. I was in D.C. when you called.
Oh,
in for the
yes, that's
report.
right.
In fact,
That's
you
right.
bumped me on the agenda. But
Oh, I'm so
that's
sorry.
okay.
Well, what happened on Friday when I called? No, yeah, Friday when I called, they the call center said you've been on here too long. In 2 minutes or 3 minutes, we're going to kick you off. And so I called the new CEO and I said, I'm going to be kicked off. And what I loved was he said, well, I'm back in Chicago, but I'll give him a call. I thought, wow, this is a different day, isn't it? So it was fun, and I really appreciate the fact that for the first time we could do it by conference call and not have to physically be there, because I have flown in to spend all of 15 minutes in the room giving the report and then being kicked back out. So
We talked a little bit about research, but you've done a lot of publications. And the one I'm most familiar with is the book that you wrote with Eric Kelly.
yes.
Are there other publications that you're particularly proud of, or articles? Or
Oh, golly, after a while they all seem to sort of blend together. The book was fun, and its reception has been so good. That's been nice. I'm writing another book on implementation, this one. So sort of as a follow-up. But I haven't had any time to get it. Sage has sent me a nasty note just the other day.
Well, we talked earlier on about mentors that you might have had. You've kind of shepherded quite a number of students through the program. Are there any proteges or people that students you're particularly proud of?
Oh, I have. Oh, yeah. I love all my students. No, in fact, I think that's the worst part about being a dean. You don't get to be close to the students like you do when you're a faculty member and a department chair. But John Carruthers was our master student in Arizona. He got his PhD at the University of Washington, Seattle, and now he heads the program at Georgetown University. So I'm proud of him.
Okay.
And we've kept in touch all these years. I just got a wedding invitation from one. I tell you, I probably write 3 or 4 references a year from people I haven't seen in years. But they've all done very remarkably well, I think, and had good, solid careers. Some have been more spectacular than others, but I, as a planning educator, think that we give them this wonderful foundation, and then the profession really hands them the profession. You get out and you learn a great deal on the job that we can't teach. We can't teach you the politics that go on. We can't teach you really how to do the front desk effectively, which is where everybody sort of meets Jesus moments, So I realize that the profession does a lot of the educating. But we get the students to a certain point, and we hope with a lot of enthusiasm to go out into the profession.
Well, you're a little, I guess, in a minority of being an academic with an AICP. And, there's been a lot of controversy about that.
Yes, there has.
Do you want to talk about that, or what your thoughts
Sure. I have fought for AICP forever. When I was in Missouri and was the chapter president, we actually got all the cities to agree not to hire any consultants that were not AICP. So there's always been this effort on my part to sort of professionalize planning and planners. So, and I see that AICP is the way. I sometimes resent having to do all the CM credits. Because you're going, oh no, not another ethics class. But, actually that is the way that we keep being professional. So, I might whine and complain at the time, but I do appreciate the value of all of it.
But more particularly, what do you think about faculty members as AICP members?
Well, we are teaching students to go out and do a profession. So I actually feel very strongly, believe it or not having all of my faculty AICP, but the junior faculty were AICP. They left. But I really think that it's very important. I mean, we're setting people up for a profession, and we need to be part of that profession. We need to be highly engaged. I don't even mind so much if you aren't, I don't like it, but I don't get angry if you're not AICP, but you're very engaged in the profession. But I get frustrated because I want us to be like architects or like engineers. No one can do their work but them. And that's how I want the rest of the world to view planners. I'm tired of the engineers thinking they can plan. I'm tired of the architects saying they can plan. We can plan. And we need to make people recognize the fact that we are the planners.
Well, as an academic, you have a unique view on the future of teaching. A lot of changes, electronic courses and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
What do you think about the opportunities and problems associated with the changing?
Well, it's on my bad days I say, gosh, I'm glad I'm near the end of my career and not the beginning of it. It's here you have a very ancient system that hadn't changed a whole lot until about 15, 20 years ago, and the changes started coming. And very gradual at first, but they're coming very rapidly now. And universities don't look a thing like they did when I started out even. Now, having said that, when I was in school, the first calculator was about the size of this table. You got to go up student by student to use it one at a time, and we had to do the cards for the computer. So everyone's sitting there with all this information and the ability to deal with large volumes of data at your fingertips has, of course, changed your ability to do research and a lot of things that we didn't have starting out 25, 30 years ago. But online classes, that's the thing, the buzz right now. The last committee I've chaired on the PAB has been how to accredit online programs. So we will be coming out with that next year, and there'll be some beta programs at some of the larger universities that are coming online. So planning will be taught online.
Okay.
That's coming, and there's no way to hold it back. I mean, we get prompted and pushed at this university to go online, and you can imagine at schools like Ohio State that by gum they're going to go online. And I think it's Arizona State now has 70 online diplomas, so that's a big wave of the future. I think
You don't sound real excited about that.
well, because I've always enjoyed the one-on-one with students. I've always enjoyed watching the light bulbs come on as you're talking and discussing back and forth and pushing and prodding. All those experiences have made being a professor rewarding to me. So online, I've not done any online, so I can't really do any great comparison, but I can't imagine that you get the same kick out of it. I do think it's a great way to reach people, and I've been nagging this planning program to at least do a certificate online for people in small towns that could use that knowledge base and be very, very applied in what we offer as a certificate program, and maybe get them to come. And I thought about starting a hybrid here where for 2 weeks, for 2 summers, they'd have to come in and do projects together, some way to get to interact with them. But many degrees are online totally. Never see the student.
So what advice would you have for a young student that wants to go into planning, either to be a professional planner or to be a professor? What advice might you have?
Ooh, that's a hard one, because if I'd known I was going to be the administrator the whole time, I doubt that I would have gone into being a professor. I thought I'd be a professor. I still love the planning profession. I think it's an exciting time in the planning profession, because on some levels people are, for the first time, really awakening to the idea that, oh gee, we have to plan our use of our limited resources and all. So I think it's a new day for planning. I think we're going to get a lot more recognition and a lot more ability to do things that we haven't had in the past. It's been a push at the edges. Now I think we'll have a much more dominant role. So I guess I would probably say I'd go into the profession before I go into academia.
Maybe be that consultant after all.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was going to be a great, fun job. Now I've had too many friends that have had to testify over months and things like that, and they said, no, not fun.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory. Is there
Yes.
anything that you would like to talk about that we didn't touch on? Anything?
Well, I'm very proud that I'm the first PhD out of the University of Texas at Austin, and that program really evolved and grew and really stuck. That makes me very proud. I did my internship for the city of Austin, and as a master's student, I was really into historic preservation, so I interned in historic preservation, and the woman who ran it was she and I in the department, said go out and do write-ups on these buildings to send off to get on the National Register and all. So up and down the street I went on these buildings, and then I made the reports and made the report to the commission and then to the city council on what we would do with these old buildings on 6th Street in Austin, Texas. And I said, oh, I can see a boutique, I can see a dance studio on the 2nd floor. Obviously, I never dreamed what 6th Street would really become, but I'm proud to say I was the one that started the ball rolling on 6th Street. That was a fun thing, and that's why I think actually I enjoyed the profession. Things I always enjoyed were the challenges. For example, we did a Main Street project, and there was no money to take the facades off and redo the buildings for historic reasons, but there was money in low-income housing. So we wrote those grants, got the money, and all the 2nd floor of those buildings are low-income housing, while the bottom floors are the businesses redone. So it's figuring out how to skin that bear that makes planning really exciting.
Well, with that, I want to thank you and appreciate the information.
Well, my pleasure.
Okay.